Somewhere in America right now, there's a loaf of bread sitting out on a kitchen counter. Soft and white and ordinary, and nothing about it looks like a problem. But worked into a whole lot of that bread, mixed right into the flour before it ever reaches your hands. There's a chemical that hasn't been allowed in Europe since before some of you bought your first house. Britain stopped allowing it back in 1990, and that's when one country after another followed. Canada, China, India, Brazil, every one of them walking away from it. Here, using it is still perfectly fine. The stuff has lived in American bread, buns, bagels, and pizza dough for over 100 years, and most folks eating it tonight have never once heard its name. That name is what I'm going to hand you. I'll tell you why it's still here when so much of the world let it go, and I'll show you how to spot it on a label in about 3 seconds tonight in your own kitchen. My name's Wendell, and my whole working life played out inside the American food business. Decades of it, all on the manufacturing side. Which companies were they? That part I'm keeping to myself, and there's a good reason for it. What I'm about to describe to you isn't one bad apple sitting in one bad factory somewhere. It's simply how the whole business runs, from the top floor down to the loading dock. And when something I tell you is only what I heard, never what I watched happen with my own 2 eyes, I'll flag it right then and there. That's the deal between us. You've probably seen the post by now. Banned in Europe, legal in America. A scary list a mile long, dyes and preservatives and things you can't pronounce, topped off with a headline swearing the food business is out to poison your grandchildren. Let me be straight with you, because being straight is about the only thing I've got left to offer. Most of that list is exaggerated, plain and simple. A good number of the things on it aren't off limits in Europe at all, and I'm going to prove that to you before we're done. The folks sharing those posts usually can't tell the difference between something that's truly not allowed over there, something that only has to carry a warning, and something nobody ever used there to begin with, which means 3 very different animals keep getting crammed into one scary word. But here's the part that matters. Buried under all that noise sits a hard little kernel of truth. There are a handful of things Europe got dead right, and the clearest one of all, the one that's probably in your kitchen tonight, is the bread chemical I just mentioned. So let me walk you through it, the way I'd explain it to a neighbor over coffee, what it is, why it's still here, what's actually proven, and what's just plain caution. By the time we're done, you'll know exactly what to look for. Stay with me. The name is potassium bromate. On the label, it might come right out and say it, potassium bromate, or it might tuck itself behind 2 quieter words, bromated flour. Here's what it does, in plain English. When you bake bread, the gluten in the dough behaves like a net made of tiny rubber bands, and that net traps the gas the yeast gives off, which is the whole reason a loaf rises in the first place. Potassium bromate tightens every one of those little rubber bands. The net pulls stronger, so the dough holds more gas, climbs higher, and bakes up into a loaf that's taller, whiter, and finer in the crumb. Cheaper on top of all that, because you pull more bread out of the very same sack of flour. I watch bakers swear by the stuff. For most of the last century, that's simply how the good commercial bread came together, and it's been part of American baking since right around the Second World War. So where does it hide? Commercial white bread, hamburger and hot dog buns, bagels, flour tortillas, frozen pizza crust, and because it goes in way back at the flour stage, it turns up where you'd never once think to look, since a single bulk bag of bromated flour at a pizza shop or a corner bakery ends up inside everything they roll out that day. Now, I owe you the good news, because a lot of these scary videos conveniently leave the good news out. A great many American brands quietly walked away from this years ago. King Arthur, the baking company, never touched it. A lot of the big national bread names dropped it more than a decade back, which means this isn't in every loaf anymore. It's still around, though, mostly in the bulk flour that supplies restaurants and the smaller bakeries, and over in Europe you simply couldn't use it at all, which brings us to the real question, and it isn't whether the stuff is scary. The real one, the question nobody ever bothers to ask, is why it's still here when so much of the world already said no. This is the part I most want you to hold on to, because once you see it, you'll never read an ingredient label the same way again. America and Europe don't actually argue about the science all that much. Both sides have read the very same studies. Where they part ways is on what to do when there's doubt left over. Europe runs on one simple idea: prove it's safe first. Before a company over there can drop a new additive into food, the thing has to be tested, cleared, and added onto an approved list. And if it isn't on that list, it doesn't go in the food. Plain as that. And every so often, they circle back to recheck the older ones too. America runs on the exact opposite idea. Here, a new ingredient counts as more or less innocent until proven guilty, so it slides into your food and tends to stay right there until somebody proves it's a problem. And there's a piece of this most people have never heard a single word about. We've got a rule in this country called generally recognized as safe. When it first got written in, back in the late 1950s, the whole thing was meant as pure common sense. Nobody wanted to sit around formally reviewing salt and vinegar and baking soda, since everybody already knew those were fine, so they carved out an exception for the obvious familiar stuff. Picture it like a trusted regulars list at a club. A short roster of familiar faces the doorman waves straight through without ever checking a thing. Here's what happened as the years rolled on. Companies were handed the power to start adding their own names onto that list. A company can hire its own experts, rule that its own brand new ingredient is generally recognized as safe, and start selling it the very next morning. And the kicker is, it doesn't have to breathe a word to anybody on the outside. The doorman never even hears there's a new face standing on the list. That part, I can tell you flat out, is real. Because that's simply how the system works in this country. And it's the reason things can be sitting in your food tonight that no outside reviewer ever laid eyes on. And in some cases, nobody on the outside even knows are in there at all. Now, to be fair, and you'll notice I keep stopping to be fair, because the truth serves you a whole lot better than a scare ever could. Bromate isn't one of those quiet, self-declared ones. The stuff is old, grandfathered in years ago, used and studied for decades on end, but it lives inside that very same system. A system built to let things sit on the shelf year after year, with nobody going back to take a fresh look. It wasn't until 2024 that anyone in this country even put potassium bromate on a list to give it another look, and that lands after roughly 100 years on the market. So is the stuff actually dangerous? Here's where I have to slow myself down and tread careful with you, because this is exactly the spot where most of these videos drive clean off the road. In animal studies, rats mostly, fed high doses across a whole lifetime, potassium bromate triggered tumors, kidney, thyroid, a couple of other spots besides. That's a real result, and it's the reason the scientists who rank these things worldwide dropped it into the possibly carcinogenic to humans column. Hold on that middle word for a second, possibly. They placed it in a middle tier on purpose, because it means the evidence in animals looks solid while the evidence in actual people stays thin. Nobody has ever shown the stuff hands a human being cancer from eating a sandwich. There's another wrinkle here, and the industry's defense on this one is honestly fair. Bake the bread properly, and most of the bromate breaks down into a harmless cousin called bromide. It mostly bakes right out of the loaf. The catch is that mostly has never meant always, because if you pour in too much or you underbake the loaf, some of it can survive into the finished bread. Testing has turned up traces of exactly that. And even here at home, back in 2014, there came a real push to get bakers using far less of it for that very reason. So let me hand it to you straight, the way I wish more folks would. This isn't a proven poison story. It's a precaution story, plain and simple. Europe didn't walk away from bromate because somebody caught it hurting people. They walked because the animal evidence rattled them, because good substitutes already sat on the shelf, and because they'd flat out rather not roll the dice. That's the whole disagreement in a single breath. Europe acts on the worry, while we sit and wait on the proof. Call it wise if you like. Plenty of reasonable people have landed on the overcautious side instead, and they've been doing it for just about as long as the argument has been around. But now, at the very least, you understand what it is you're really arguing about. Here's the thing that always stuck with me, back when I sat on the inside. These companies already know exactly how to make the food without the questionable ingredient. They pull it off all the time, just for other people. Walk into a shop in Britain and grab a bottle of Fanta. Same orange soda, same name printed across the label. Over there, the color comes straight from pumpkin and carrot extract, and there's real orange juice swimming around in it. The version sold to you here? No juice anywhere in sight, and the orange instead comes from a pair of synthetic dyes. Fruit Loops, the cereal, up in Canada and over in Britain, leans on real fruit and vegetable juice for its colors. Here at home, that very same cereal leans on petroleum-based dyes instead. Mountain Dew, sold over in Britain, pulls its tint from beta-carotene, the exact same thing that turns a plain carrot orange, while the version sold here has leaned on Yellow 5 for years. Same brand, same spot on the shelf, just a different country and somehow a completely different recipe sitting inside the package. And why does that happen? It almost always comes down to one small thing, a label. Most of those dyes aren't even off limits in Europe, so keep that fact in your back pocket because we're circling right back to it. What's truly different over there is that any food carrying certain dyes has to wear a warning right on the box. A line reading that it may have an adverse effect on activity and attention in children. No company on earth wants that sentence printed across a cereal box aimed at little kids. And that's when they reformulate. They swap in the carrot juice and the beta-carotene, and they quietly skip the warning altogether, which tells you something worth more than any fear list out there. When a company clings to the cheaper ingredient over here and the cleaner one over there, it isn't because the clean version can't be pulled off. It's a choice, plain and simple. The recipe just follows the rules, so change the rules, and the recipe changes overnight. I sat near enough to watch that math get done more than once. Now I owe you that promise I made way back at the top, that some of the things on those scary lists aren't off limits in Europe at all. Because if I'm going to ask you to trust me, then I have to hand you the parts that don't fit the headline either. Those dyes I just walked you through, red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, not banned over there. They carry that warning label, sure, but you can buy them all day long without a second thought. Not allowed and just labeled are nowhere near the same thing, and a whole lot of the people selling you fear are counting on you never learning the difference. Take two of the most famous boogeymen on those lists, BHA and BHT, preservatives that keep fat from turning rancid. People swear up and down they're banned in Europe. They simply are not. Europe allows both of them within set limits and even hands them their own little code numbers. Are they more tightly controlled over there than they are here? They sure are, and I won't pretend otherwise. As for off-limits altogether, the way these videos love to claim it, that's not even close to the truth. And if a video tells you BHA is banned across Europe, then it flat out didn't do its homework. There is one on those lists Europe genuinely did pull, and that's titanium dioxide. It's a white powder that makes candy and frosting look brighter on the shelf. Europe lifted it out of food back in 2022. But even with that one, let's stay honest, because nobody ever proved the stuff hurts people. The scientists who studied it over there came back saying they couldn't rule out a worry about DNA damage and they couldn't settle on a safe amount. So since the powder is only in there to make things look whiter anyway, they pulled it purely to play it safe. Meanwhile, scientists right here, along with scientists in Britain, in Canada, and the international health experts, all looked at the very same evidence and chose to keep it. They didn't all get paid off in some back room. They just read the same doubt a different way. And here's the piece nobody making these videos ever admits out loud, that this whole thing runs in both directions. There's an artificial sweetener out there called cyclamate. We let it go here in America back in 1970. Europe still allows it to this very day, and has for a solid 50 years running. So not allowed somewhere has never once meant proven dangerous. It just means one side got nervous a little sooner than the other. And I'll give my own country its due right here, because that old story, the one where America does nothing while Europe nobly protects its people, that story is well out of date by now. Look at just the last couple of years. Two of those old ingredients have already been pulled clean off the shelves here at home. A bright red dye that had hung around just about forever, and an old citrus soda additive, both of them on their way out the door right now. A handful of states have moved to clear the bread chemical itself out of their food too, with a deadline now sitting only a couple of years off. And there's finally serious talk of closing that self-declared loophole I told you about, which would force a company to give somebody fair notice before slipping a brand new ingredient onto your plate. Now, the honest footnote, because I always leave you one. A lot of the dye cleanup you keep hearing about is voluntary, just companies making promises with nobody forcing their hand. Promises get broken all the time, and some of these very same companies have shattered similar ones before. But the direction itself is real, and the gap between us and Europe keeps closing. Slower than it ought to, later than it ought to, but closing all the same. So what do you actually do with all of this? Don't panic, that's the one thing I'd ask of you. Let me leave you with the two ideas that have served me far better than any fear list ever did. The first is the oldest rule in the whole book: the dose makes the poison. Everything turns harmful at a high enough amount and stays harmless at a low enough one. Water and plain table salt included. The safe limits on these additives usually get set way down low, somewhere around 1/100th of the highest dose that showed no harm at all in the animal studies. So there's a big cushion built right in, and it sits there on purpose. The second idea is the one I truly want you carrying out the door with you. Learn the difference between a hazard and a risk. Think of a hazard as something that could hurt you under the wrong conditions. Risk is the other question entirely, whether it'll really hurt you at the amount you actually swallow. Picture a shark out in the open water. That's a hazard. But a shark in a photograph carries no risk to you at all. Most of these banned in Europe chemicals are sharks in photographs, a real hazard sitting on paper, and almost no risk once it lands on your plate. Now the practical part, and it's a whole lot simpler than they want you believing. You don't need to memorize anybody's fear list. You need to read one single line. The ingredient list itself. On a loaf of bread, hunt for the words potassium bromate or bromated flour. And if you'd rather skip it, just grab a loaf that doesn't carry it. Costs you the very same money. They're easy enough to find these days. And if you want to spend your worry where it'll do the most good, then spend it right here. The strongest, best proven warnings in all of food science have nothing to do with a speck of dye in a cookie. They're about processed and cured meats, the bacon and the ham and the hot dogs, which the world's top cancer researchers flatly drop into the causes cancer column. That one isn't a possibly the way bromate is. It's settled, flat out. Ease up right there, and you'll have done more for yourself than you ever will chasing every last additive in the store. So that's the whole of it, laid out plain. There's a real chemical sitting in real American bread that much of the world simply won't touch. And the reason it's still here isn't some grand conspiracy cooked up in a boardroom. It comes down to a difference in philosophy. We sit around waiting on the proof, while they just don't. Now you know which side is which, and you know how to read the one single line on the package that actually tells you the truth. I'd genuinely like to hear back from you. Drop me a comment telling me what part of the country you're in, then go take a good look at the bread in your kitchen tonight, and tell me what that label says. I read every last one of them. Next time around, I'll tell you about another chemical that's been worked into some American bread, the very same stuff that goes into yoga mats and the soles of your shoes. And I'll tell you how, just a few years back, ordinary people pushed one of the biggest sandwich chains in the whole country into pulling it right off the menu. That's a story well worth your time. I'm not angry about any of this, you understand. Anger left me a good long while ago, and I'm far too old to carry it around now anyway, so I just figured you ought to know exactly what I knew on the day I walked back out those doors. Take care of yourselves.